have you all here this morning. But more importantly, it is an honor to welcome you to the George Herbert Walker School of Business Speaker Series. This past summer, I had a remarkable experience that took me to Oxford University, the Said School of Business. And the intent of my journey to Oxford was to become a student once again on the very important subject of leadership. And when I arrived at Oxford, I knew that this is an institution that had been around for a very, very long time. I knew that it had a remarkable reputation as a place where people come to be fed of knowledge and ideas. But what I did not know was that I was going to meet David Pendleton, professor of leadership at Oxford. In the time that I was there, David's ideas on leadership touched me, moved me, transformed me. And I came back to Webster University as much stronger, more effective, and ready to begin a new journey as a leader. But I did not stop there. I also wanted to make sure that my colleagues at Webster would have the opportunity to be able to gain from the wisdom and perspective of David Pendleton. And so we extended an invitation to David to become our visiting professor of leadership for this academic year, and he was gracious enough to accept that invitation. David is an associate fellow at the Said Business School at Oxford. And we're also very proud to say that he's a visiting professor at the George Herbert Walker School of Business. He's a chartered psychologist of the British Psychological Society. He specializes in leadership, assessing, coaching, engaging senior executives in developing their abilities to lead change and to create high-performance culture. But more importantly, he is a mover. He's an individual that truly believes in a couple of things I want to share with you. You will find in David's presentation today that people don't want to be led by pessimists. They want to be led by individuals who are excited about what they do and believe fervently in the value of impact. Secondly, you will get from David's presentation today that leadership is not a trophy, but a responsibility. I think David would also remind you in his presentation today that the greatest danger is not failure, but being successful without knowing why. David Pendleton understands that the best leaders cannot do everything, but they find a way to do remarkable things by bringing people together. He has a new book out called Leadership, All You Need to Know. If you want to pick this up, please, I recommend that you do so. It is a very quick read, but you will find yourself going back to it over and over and over again for nuggets of wisdom. I've done that, and I hope that you will pick up a copy as well. So please help me welcome a visiting professor of leadership, Oxford professor, David Pendleton.
Can you hear me? Yes. Even at the back? I often say that the last time I asked that question, someone at the back said, yes, but I'm willing to change places with someone who can't. And I wasn't too encouraged by that. It's lovely that you come and you sit at the front of the classroom. You know, the great thing about students is that they want to be there, but they don't really want to be there. You know, they all come and sit at the back. And I have a little fantasy that I can hit a button and the blackboard comes down at the other end of the room, all the chairs turn around, and I just simply walk that end and deliver to a room like this. But thank you very much for your welcome. Where's Benjamin gone? Where's he gone?
He disappeared.
Yeah, he's heard me before. Yeah, there he go, good. Anyway, look, I'd like to spend a little time. I know that you're busy, and I know you need to get away. So what I'd like to do is to give you a whistle-stop tour, really, of some ideas about leadership that I hope you'll find helpful. How do I advance my slides? Do I have a clicker or? Great stuff. It's got more than one button. It's got one too many. Is it on the right? I had to realize, Toto, that we're not in Kansas anymore. That's what Oxford looks like. This is the Radcliffe camera. not exactly a pocket model. This is All Souls College. And I thought I'd show you how important the college is that I did my doctorate at, because it's there. Right there. It's the one that people stand with their backs to when they take this picture. And that's the only thing it's famous for. It's called Brasenose College. It was founded in the year 1509 when Henry VIII came to the throne. And I like to tell the story of Brasenose because it's a fun story. There was a hall on that site that had a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head with a ring through its nose, and so you could knock the door with the knocker. And students being students, and they have been through the centuries, they decided to steal the knocker in 1509. The college was so incensed by this that they made every single graduate from Brasenose take a vow that they would never teach at Stamford in Lincolnshire, which is the school to which the students stole the knocker and took it. And that vow was taken every year for the next 300 years. And the only reason they stopped taking the vow was that the school in Stamford in Lincolnshire went bankrupt and the college bought the school to get the knocker back. That's what I call a grudge. The side business school looks a bit more modern, looks a bit like that. In fact, that is it. I'm very proud to say that I'm from there, but I'm also very proud to say that I'm from here. It's a joy to be here with you in St. Louis. It's a part of the States I'd not been to. And I'm going to spend time back and forth between Oxford, Bristol, where I live, and St. Louis. And very much enjoying my time here, meeting great faculty that I can have interesting conversations with, meeting interesting folks like yourselves who are busy being the business leaders in St. Louis that St. Louis needs. And so what I'd like to do is to share a few ideas with you that have occurred to me about leadership. And I want to start with the title, Leading in the Tough Times, because what I want to say to you is two things, both of which you might disagree with. One, there is nothing different about leading in tough times. It's leading. And the tough times or the good times are both fraught with danger. And two, whatever the challenges of leadership, the chances are that you can't meet all of them on your own. And I hope the second of those statements is not seen as an insult, but as a relief, because I know I can't either. I know that everything I've read about, everything I've researched about leadership, every leader I've worked with, every top team I've worked with is full of incomplete individuals. But they can be complete together. They often say you can't play a symphony on your own. And leadership's got such variety and such challenges. And the challenges don't sit still, do they? You get one solved and there's another one pops up straight behind it to challenge you again. So we need to think more like good Darwinians, that all these selection pressures are varying around us all the time. And what we've got to do is to make sure that between us we have all the bases covered so that we can go to that aspect of leadership at a world-class level that this particular challenge requires today. So I want to see if I can just demonstrate these points, and I'll try my best to do so. Here's a very confusing picture, and actually it's meant to be, because this is a colleague of mine at Oxford called Richard Pascal, who was so frustrated with all the management fads and trends and fashions and how confusing it must be for most people in business, that he started to chart them. And so he went back to the journals of 1950, and he did this study right up to 2000, simply plotting what was the literature that was written about this subject at the time, what was it about, and how long did it last. So the depth of a line on this is to do with how much of it there was, and the width of it is how long it lasted. And what you can see is two things. One, look at the explosion in writing about all these subjects as time goes by. And that's 12 years ago. Imagine that's just gone straight up still, hasn't it? It must be vertical by now. There's no possibility of reading everything in the subject anymore. Back in the day, you could be an expert because you'd read everything. Right? How do you be an expert here? There's no way that you can know everything there is to know. And the other thing it shows is every wacky idea has its day. You know, there's a good mix there of sense and nonsense. And everything has had its day. Here we have management by walking about, management by objectives, theory X, theory Y, the 1-minute manager, empowerment. You know, isn't it bewildering? How on earth do you decide what to do when you've got a business to run? Well, I work with people who have those challenges all the time. And in wearing another hat, I wear several hats. But one of the hats I wear is I also run a consulting firm in the UK. I teach at Oxford, I teach here. And I run this consulting firm out of the UK, but I do it all over the world. And I work with organizations who are facing these daily challenges. And what I can tell you is they don't run to the library every time there's a challenge. Because all you're going to find is this mass of stuff. And where the dickens do you start? So what I was challenged with personally was to say, if I want to write about leadership, if I want to know about leadership, I want to know what can I say that is consistent with all the research that's gone before, the decent research that's gone before. Quite a lot of it you can move to the side politely, like the Brussels sprouts at Christmas, you know. You can do that, but I wanted to do things that if I looked at the good research that made sense. But the second thing I wanted to do was to say something to you that you might be able to just hold in your mind when you're busy. Memorability really matters, because if we can't remember something that's sensible and helpful, we're not going to take it with us. We're not going to be able to use it. I know for sure when you're busy, you're not going to say, there's this really good idea about leadership. I think it's in a book. Are you? You're going to say, I need an answer now. Let's talk. Let's find a solution together. So what I want to show you is something that's memorable, that's consistent with the literature, and that might carry some implications for you now. Okay, let me tell you about these ideas. I wanted to ask, first of all, when does leadership make a difference? So let me ask people who know. When does leadership make a difference?
It always makes a difference.
Always? Good answer.
I agree with him.
You agree with him? Anyone else agrees with you, I suspect. Give me something specific it can do when times are tough. Provide direction. What else might it do? Motivation. Collaboration.
An example.
An example. Lots of things it can do, you know, and intuitively, we all just want to scream when we see, when does leadership make a difference? Or even to the bolder question, does it? We all want to scream, yes. And then you come back to the researcher's mindset and you say, okay, well, prove it to me. And of course, what I can't have is someone say, oh, well, let me tell you a story about this woman who did such and such. That's just anecdotal evidence. What the scientist wants to know is, show me the data. Well, what was interesting is I went back to look at a lot of the what's so-called meta-analyses. In other words, I went back to the, you know, there are some studies which are really helpful because they mean you don't have to read all the others, which is great. Someone else has done it for you, so you can read it. Aren't those shortcuts wonderful? I take them all the time. So this was one that came out in 2010. It was a study that had taken place over decades at Harvard. And the authors include Bharat Anand, the second author whom I've worked with at Harvard when I was teaching there in the fall. And he's a terrifically bright guy. He's so bright that if you stand next to him, I'm sure I can hear the hum of electricity. I'm sure I can hear that. But he's so bright. But this is the research that they did. I'll just share it with you briefly. They looked at a whole lot of businesses from lots of different industries, and they took a long period of time. It also looked like, it's like they took a long time to analyze the data because it didn't come out till 2010. They took, as the performance measure they were interested in, basically a couple of things to do with return on assets. Now, you know, how many people here have kept a secret that they're here at this meeting this morning? Do people know that you're here? Yes? Okay, at university. You need to go back and say something smart, okay, because you've come to a university. So I'm going to recommend to you Tobin's Q. Just drop it into the conversation. You know, just say, oh, we've been doing some interesting work this morning at Webster University at Tobin's Q. What do you think about it? It's simply the market value divided by the book value, but it's an interesting measure because it really means that it gives you a sense of businesses that are worth so much more than just breaking up the bits and selling them off. Okay? That's the measure that they were interested in as the dependent measure. And what they did was they looked at to see whether the CEO effect was strong or weak. And what they found was it accounted for about 13 to 15% of the variance in the outcomes. Not very much. But what you then find is that if you then start to strip away other things that could be accounting for this, actually what happens is the leadership effect goes up. So you start to look at what's called time lag effects, for example. So if you make a decision today, it won't be today that you see the effects of that. It might be next week, it might be next month, it could even be next year. So if you start to look diagonally across the data, the effect of the leadership goes up, and you account for more of the variance because of what you know about what the leader's done. But they asked a smarter question. They noticed, for example, in their data that there were more powerful effects in some businesses than others. So, for example, if you look at the wholesale electrical goods business, there were big effects for leadership. And if you look at the issue of commercial banks, which got us into all this, right? Low leader effects. It seems like they can't do much to make much of a difference. That's an interesting finding in its own right. Why might it be? Thoughts quickly, there's no definitive answer, so give me your best shot. Why low leader effects in banks, high leader effects in things like wholesale electrical goods? Say again? Regulation, smart answer. It may be that, in a sense, their hands are tied. In a sense, you wish that maybe their hands were tied even tighter, but yes, it may be that regulation prevents latitude in decision-making. Yes, sir? Arrogance. So it may just be that some sectors attract people who just don't listen. So we've got external impacts like regulation, we've got internal impacts like the psychology of the individual. Well, their answer, these authors, was this. It depends upon two things. One, scarcity of opportunity. So when there are not many opportunities around, the leadership effect goes up, but it gets even bigger if there's also not many resources around to pursue the opportunities that exist. That's when the leaders and the leadership make a difference, the biggest difference. So the way I like to think of it is, where opportunities are plentiful, the CEO effect is smaller because any fool can do it. You know, if you want to know whether or not you missed an opportunity, I'll tell you, you really did. Because if you were running a big investment bank, you know, in the 90s and late 80s, you could not fail to succeed. You know, all that was happening is that the tide was rising and all the boats got higher. Now it's tough. So this talk is called Leadership in Difficult Times, like now. And that's when the leadership effect is biggest. It's not that you do different things, but the impact of what you do grows with the difficulty of the circumstances. You think about any sporting analogy, you've got a tough game, you're at the bottom of the ninth, you're not going to pitch in some weirdly different way. You're not going to sort of throw things miles up into the air or try some wacky. You're going to do the basics, you're going to do them as well as you can. You might hope for a little inspiration. You're not going to suddenly start kicking the ball to the batter. You know, you don't want that kind of wackiness. What you want is for people to go back to the things that they know to do well and execute them perfectly, because now we're in a tough situation. It's not a different game when it's tough. It's the same game. I was standing in Hong Kong with the chief executive of Cathay Pacific Airways, surrounded by a whole bunch of angry pilots. And I had to do this day after day as we brought every single senior pilot through. And the chief exec had to say this: "You are the best pilots in the world. We know, we've selected and trained you. But we pay you too much. And we've got to reduce your pay scales. Not even your pay scales, but the pay scales of the people who are going to follow you. We're going to have to create B scales. And that's because we let things get out of control in the good times. We sowed the seeds of our demise in the good times by taking our eyes off the ball, by simply not being disciplined enough in those good times. So the leadership in the bad times was made more difficult because of decisions taken in the good times that were wrong. Expedient decisions. Now, the argument in a nutshell goes like this, however. The effect of leadership is indirect. Leadership makes a difference to things like the culture and climate. That is, what people do and how it feels in the workplace. And if we can get that right for people, and I'm proud to say that Webster seems to, because it's a great college to work for according to various polls that I've seen evidence of recently, but if we can get that environment right, then people are more likely to give us of what's called their discretionary effort. It's the bit they don't have to give. You know, if you imagine a scale, some theoretical scale, on which scoring 100 means you've just done enough not to get fired. If you go to 99, how much more than 100 could I get if I get you really fired up and motivated? 110? 150? Any advance on 150? Same for 150 later.
Is there a limit?
Is there a limit? Good question. Normally the answer is, that's the lowest estimate I've had for a while, but it always goes up. No one ever says 101. People usually go somewhere between 200 and 300. Napoleon said a motivated soldier was worth 3 unmotivated soldiers. So he used to shoot a few to encourage them. Look, don't knock it if you haven't tried it. It might work for you. But the point is that that's a big difference. Imagine, if the lady's right, 150. Imagine we can suddenly have 50% more productivity because we do things right. Because we as leaders get this relationship right. We know that the impact, therefore, on results is going to be huge. It's the people effect that we can get right as leaders. But it's indirect. It's a bit like pool shots, you know, or snooker shots. You've got to hit one ball to hit another ball to hit another ball to drive a trick shot ball into the pocket. You know, there's no lever you can pull that just says greater productivity, because boy, wouldn't you pull that as hard as you could. But there are other things you can do as leaders. One of them is get engagement right with your people. Engagement seems to be a kind of magic ingredient, which is about commitment. It's about building commitment to the vision, the values, the strategy, the goals, the purpose of the organization that we run. And I'll bet you anything, it's a while since you told people what the purpose was that you're serving as an organization. Instead, we spend time talking about things we want them to do right now. Therefore, they lose direction. They're not thinking about where we're going. We're not thinking about that brighter tomorrow that we're trying to create. And if we do that in education, we are truly lost. Because the ultimate goal of education starts to come down to some pretty powerful things. It's not about knowledge. That's relatively trivial. It's about vision. It's about values. It's about self-belief. It's about a world that we can sustain. This is the kind of dream of education. And if we don't keep reminding ourselves that that's where we're going, we lose out hugely. But I would reckon that in every industry that you represent, it's very rare that you step back, as we don't often enough step back, to remind people what it is that we're trying to do differently for the world. What is it we do? That turns people on. Most of us want to believe that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. Here's one of those wonderful meta-analyses. Just under 200,000 employees, just under 8,000 different business units. Look at this list. Employee engagement directly linked to profitability, customer satisfaction, loyalty, sales, employee retention, productivity, safety, and world peace. Well, not world peace, I just threw that in. But you can see, can't you? The reason I put if I could put that in a spray can, wouldn't you buy that can from me? Say, just spray this on your people, and all these things go up, you know? Well, the point is that leadership is a part of that spray. Employee satisfaction and engagement are mainly determined by satisfaction with the immediate supervisor. The immediate supervisor, not even the guy or the woman at the top, it's the immediate person. There's no small potatoes in a hierarchy. The immediate boss. So people tend to join a brand, but they'll leave a manager. And so we've got to get people to understand that they've got to lead from where they are in the hierarchy, because every single individual makes a difference. And the biggest difference is the immediate person I report to. There's evidence, incidentally, that shows that the people at the top really do make a big difference. It's a medium-sized difference, but it's for everybody. So when you do the math, you realize you've got a bigger impact. So, you might have an organization of 20,000 people. A medium-sized impact on 20,000 is a big impact. A huge impact on 5, who are my direct reports, is actually in absolute terms a small impact, but it makes a big difference to those 5. So we've got to connect all that up in some way. And so when I've been trying to think about leadership, I've then got to the question, what do we have to do to get some of these things right? And I want to suggest to you 4 brief propositions. The first is what leadership comprises. And the reason it's difficult is because we've got to cover 3 domains. There's the strategic domain, there's the operational domain, and there's the interpersonal domain, and they look and feel very different. The strategic domain is all about tomorrow. It deals with big pictures, integrative thinking. It thinks about not what's real, but what could be. The operational domain is all about today. It's only interested in what is and what has to be very soon. So it deals with realities. In the interpersonal domain, it's concerned with the people who are going to come with us on the journey and how we can keep them excited about and motivated in this enterprise that we're trying to achieve together. And that's hard. It's hard to do all 3 because they need different mindsets. The mindset of the strategic thinker, when you start with any problem, goes up to higher levels of generalities, out to widen the scope of the discussion, and forwards in time. That's the mindset of the strategist. The mindset of the operator, when you start with the problem, is to go in scope in order to focus, down into the details to get them right, and along a sequence to get to a critical point. It's a different mindset. And of course, what happens in the interpersonal domain is you may not go to here at all. You've somehow got to go to here. You've got to go to the part of you that senses what's going on with people. Maybe it's their emotional intelligence that we have to tune into. And of course, each of these zones has a particular name. Lady down here talked about in the tough times what you can do is set direction, and I believe that is where it starts. But setting direction starts even further back. It starts with actually making sense of the situation we're in. And that's a very broad scanning, sense-making function. And responding to the sense we're making of the situation by getting the story straight for everyone so they all understand it. We need to become chief storyteller in our enterprise. The story has to be straight for us all to have coordinated responses to it. We've got to build relationships, we've got to deliver results, and I'm very conscious that in every organization, all the stories have to end here delivering results. All of them. Doesn't matter what the organization is. It might be an orchestra, it might be a library, it might be the national government, it might be Webster University, it might be your business here in St. Louis. It's all about ultimately delivering results, but not just delivering results today, but sustainable results over time. And that takes different thinking as well. There are areas of overlap, like planning and organizing, that bridge between this vision or direction that we're trying to create and the results that we want to create. There's alignment, which is the essence of building engagement, and we've seen the power of that. And the bridge at the bottom is called teamworking, where we hook the relationships into the results that we want to create and make them more likely to be created simply because the teamworking can create what is called that phenomenon, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. It's actually thinking that originated in Germany under the Gestalt movement. The whole can be greater than the sum of its parts. The reason that the England soccer team hates playing Germany is because the England soccer team is nearly always made up of intensely valuable players. And if you look at the absolute transfer value of the England football team, it's often 50% greater than the Germany football team. But the German football team always beats us. Why? Because they seem to understand what team is about. So frustrating. But we need to get to understand that leading is about all of these things plus one thing. And I'm calling it leading. Now you think I'm double counting, you think this is tautological. It isn't. Imagine this is a leadership orchestra. This is the conductor. What it says is, right now, in this business, what we need is to pay attention to getting our plans better sorted. And there are some people who are really good at that. That's you. Could you help us get our plans better sorted? And so he gets the plans sorted. And what we then start to realize is, wait a minute, we've got the plans are very clear, but I don't think people are coming with us on the journey. Could you please help us get better aligned? Because you're much better at that than he is and me. So you're on my leadership team. Can you please take the baton and run with that for a while? And then I'm going to note and see how that's going on. And what I'm then going to say is, you know what? I think we better start really deepening these relationships here. And we know that you're the specialist in that, and we would really like your help with this. So the point is that as the journey changes over time, we need different kinds of leadership contributions. And so someone's in the middle there conducting the orchestra. Or if you like, imagine you're standing on a board which is pivoted underneath. It's a question of which way do you need to lean right now? Which way does the leadership need to lean? And if you run a matrix organization, it might say, right now we need growth, so let's give a little dominance in the matrix to the territories, because that's where they'll do the selling. But then it might say, you know, this year we need to do our products are getting a bit old and tired, so let's start leaning towards the functions, because that's where the innovation will take place. So it's balancing the leadership contributions as the journey's demand changes. Can you still hear me at the back? Okay. There's one other thing you need to do, and that is, as leaders, cope with pressure. Now, pressure isn't a part of the model, but it acts on it. It acts on our leadership. And there are three dominant ways of doing that according to the research. There's this way, which is some people just take all the pressure on themselves and just try to cope. It's called, in the jargon, moving away from people, taking it all on inside yourself, resorting to good old Victorian fortitude. You know, this lady at the moment is not doing so well, I think, with fortitude. But nonetheless, there are two other ways that happen. There are two other responses. One's called move against and the other's called move towards. Move against, this is move away, which is I pull away from all the people around me and I try to cope with the pressure on my own. The second is, and you've sometimes, I bet, worked for bosses like this, if I'm under pressure, you're under pressure. And so are you. Take that smile off your face. And you're at the back. And that's this one. I used to work for him. And then there's the third one, which is the kind of dependency response called move towards people. And often you'll hear it expressed like this, I think I'm in trouble. Or something that sounds a little more grown up, but not a lot. because what I really need is reassurance. Now, look, the point is that we are all subject to these potential emotional overreactions. But we can know what they're likely to be. There are psychometrics that tell us about those things. This one's called the Hogan Development Survey. When we assess people, we assess all these 8 things, 7 plus 1, coping with pressure. And we use a personality questionnaire called the NEO. In my view, it's not my questionnaire. We buy it in, but I think it's the best there is. It's created here in the States by Costa and McRae. It's called the NEO, and it tells you about neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And it carries quite a significant correlation with who's likely to become a leader and how effective a leader you're likely to be. Now, it's not completely deterministic. Personality is not like that. But one thing I can tell you is that if you compare personality and intelligence, that personality is 4 times as effective as a predictor of decent leadership than intelligence is. It helps to be smart, but it doesn't help to be so much smarter than your followers that you leave them behind. But what does matter is your personality. It's who you are as well as what you do. There isn't time to expand on that, but I will go into the second proposition. It's very hard to be complete in all of those areas of the model I put on the screen before you. there are good reasons why. If you have a look, and you want to have a look at it, in the book I've tried to set out logical reasons, psychological reasons, empirical reasons why that is. But I'll tell you one simple fact. I and my colleagues have probably assessed between us 2,000 executives from all over the world. We've never yet found one who's world class in all 8 aspects of leading. Pause, because I want you to remember that. We've never yet found one who's outstanding in all of them. Now, it may be that it's you. You're the person I've been waiting to meet because it's you. But on the assumption that I haven't met them yet, there may be something fundamental about why. And I think it's simply because we are like single bed sheets, but the problem is that leadership is a double bed. And it doesn't matter which way you pull it, you're going to leave a gap. And organizations make that error. They go from one incomplete individual to another, simply correcting for the bit that the last person missed, leaving a new bit uncovered. Double bed, single sheet. Think of the heptathlon. It's a good way of thinking about this. This is Jessica Ennis, and she won the gold medal in London. And the problem with the heptathlon is that you never find a heptathlete who's equally good in all aspects. She's not. She's a brilliant runner. She's an excellent jumper, but her throwing nearly always lets her down. And that's because she has to compromise the training. If she wants to run like the wind, she can't carry lots of upper body muscle. If she wants to jump, she can't be too heavy. But if you're not very heavy, you haven't got much to put behind the throwing events. And so the heptathlon works quite well. Remember, the primary colors model that I showed you earlier has got 7 zones and 3 domains. This is 3 types of event and 7 events. It's a very close metaphor for leadership. And the problem is it's hard to be good in all areas. And so what she has to do is be so good in the running and okay enough in the jumping for the relatively poor performances in the throwing not to let her down, and she can still win a gold medal. The way I like to think of it is, don't try to be a duck. Apparently there's an Argentinian saying that the duck is a bird that can walk, fly and swim, but none of it very well. Now, look, talk about Tobin's Q when you go back to work, because that's really smart stuff. Don't talk about the duck. It's just keep that quiet. Okay. Third proposition is this, and I'm conscious of time going by, so I'll try not to take too long. But the third proposition is this. Personality doesn't make you good at things, but it can set up a pattern of helps and hindrances. And it interacts with your experience to leave you with certain strengths and limitations. Every single one of you will have both strengths and limitations, and you'll have been reminded of them, no doubt, repeatedly through a series of appraisals through your life. But what you won't necessarily be so aware of is how your personality helps or hinders you with that. I'll work a simple example. How many of you here are good at planning and organizing? Great. Please, will you write to me, because I'm hopeless at it, and I need people like you to work with. Okay, so I need to know where they are at any given time. Okay. Look, there's a personality variable called conscientiousness. And conscientiousness has got scales on it like self-discipline, order, taking your responsibilities seriously, wanting to do a good job. So you can imagine that if someone's conscientious, it's going to help them a lot in planning and organizing. And if you're high on conscientiousness and good at planning and organizing, we can call that almost certainly a natural strength. But it's possible to be good where you're not naturally helped. It's possible to learn to do things where your personality helps and you haven't learned to do them yet. So imagine you're conscientious, but you haven't yet learned the skills of planning and organizing. That's technically a limitation because you haven't learned how to do it, but I want to say that's a potential strength. It's something you should be able to learn how to do. You've been dealt the right cards, you just need to learn how to play the hand. But of course some people are good at things where they're working against the grain of their personality. This is someone who's learned to do project management, but they're not very conscientious, so it's not a very natural strength, so I want to call that a fragile strength. Remember, it's fragile, it will break easily. You've got to keep attending to it, you've got to look after it. And then, of course, there's the fourth box that no one ever wants to be in the fourth box, do they? But this is me when it comes to planning and organising. It's what I would call a resistant limitation. It's a limitation because I can't do it, but it's resistant because I don't have the cards that I've been dealt either. So it's hard for me to learn that. This is the 5'8" basketball player. Now, 5'8" basketball players can play basketball, but boy, have they got to work at it. They've got to work at it so much harder because it's resistant. They're not going to get any taller. I went to see the doctor the other day. He said that my body mass index had gone off the scale. I said, I have a height problem then. Now, he also said to me, he said, you know, one day he said, David, he said, I've got to tell you, he said, you're going to die. And I said to him, you can't just say that, I want a second opinion. He said, okay, you're ugly as well. The point about natural strengths is that you can always work with them. But you've got to work on two things, your potential strengths and your fragile strengths. People forget. They say, I've learned how to do that, and then it just goes off the boil, and they're not very good at it anymore. Why? They haven't kept it up. They've not focused on it. The thing about the non-conscientious planner who's learned how to do it is that they're still probably quite distractible. Something in their personality needs to keep them focused. Or is it somebody in their office that needs to keep them focused? Either will do. But what's the point over here? You know, by now, the chances are my learning to be a wonderful planner and organizer are pretty well close to zero. And so that's why Benjamin Akande gave me Dory at the back there and Dion, who's on vacation today, because after just one day of working with me yesterday, she needed a break. Because they work where I'm poor. But together, we're organized. I've even got my tie on today. Look, we don't have to keep beating our head against this brick wall. That's not a limitation necessarily that's smart to work on. It's better to think of how to work around it by getting someone around you who's strong. Peter Erskine was a guy who was handed a poison chalice. British Telecom spun off a mobile phone company called BT Cellnet, and when they did that, the market anticipated it was going to tank straight away. 4 years later, Peter Erskine, the CEO, had transformed it, rebranded it into O2, which is a really hip, energized, positive mobile phone company in the UK, and they sold it to Telefonica of Spain for 27 billion euros. 4 years. And what he will tell you, and he stood in the lecture room at Oxford, we had worked with him in Oxford and with his top team developing their leadership. But Peter Erskine stood in our lecture theatre and said, when he just announced the sale, he said, I'm not good at strategy. So the first thing I did was hire someone who was. Here. He put him in the next door office and he listened to him. Peter didn't abrogate responsibility for leading the organization. He realized he was an incomplete leader. He was brilliant in the operational domain. He was superb in the interpersonal domain. He wasn't good in the strategic domain. So he found someone who was and put him in the next door office. Incomplete individuals, but still complete leadership. But it's collective, not solo. And what Peter had done, therefore, was find someone whose natural strengths were in exactly the area of Peter's resistant limitations. And instead, what do we tend to do? We tend to recruit people just like us. Why? Because they seem like awfully nice chaps. I can just seem to get on with them. You know, I find old, bald, fat blokes really good to work with. And it was Plutarch, we're talking the Greek philosopher Plutarch, an awfully long time ago, who said this: I don't need a friend who changes when I change and who nods when I nod. My shadow does that much better. You know, good old Plutarch, 3,000 years ago, saying, don't do that. Takes us a while to get the lessons, I suppose, 3,000 years. We can probably learn it by now. You know, Woody Allen's psychotherapy, 35 years, no change. I stood in a room like this and had a room full of Deloitte partners. Now, these are successful, smart people by any stretch of the imagination, right? Deloitte partners. And I said to them, how many of you in your last appraisal, your last performance review, were told you needed to work on things which if I asked your mother, your teachers at high school told you needed to work on as well? Right? So half the group put their hands up. I said, well, shall we stop now? What are we doing? It's because we're trying to work in the area of resistant limitations. We need another kind of solution. We need to realize that we're incomplete on our own, but we might be able to be complete together. Think of the talent in this room today. If we could get that together, couldn't we take St. Louis by storm? The talent in this room. So maybe, if I can leave you with a simple model to hold in mind, you can take this with you. And how can you use it? Well, one way you can simply do it is simply to say, when and how do we do these things as a leadership team? When and how do we set direction? When and how do we do with planning and organizing and so on? And if anyone ventures the answer, oh, we do it all the time, they haven't thought about it. When and how, and then ask how well do we do these things? And then ask, who's our specialist? If I'm falling short of targets, who do I turn to? There's nearly always a go-to man or woman that will deliver for you. But what do you do in the area of creating alignment? Who's that? Well, we all kind of do it. That's another answer that shows you haven't thought about it. We can do better as leaders. So what I'm suggesting is that if we think of this model simply as the home page, it gives us a checklist of things we can do, and maybe an agenda of people that we need around us who are really good, who are world class at something, not trying to be okay at everything. World class at something rather than okay at everything. And then we get them to work together. It's written up in the book, and that's what I wanted to tell you, and I hope I haven't kept you too long. Thank you. I'm very happy to take any comments or questions if you have the time.
Yeah, David, this is great. I'm going to buy your book and stuff, but this is my question dilemma, which is, if you look at the truly great leaders of the world over the last 200 years, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, from what I've read, and it's not perfect research, I don't think any of them ever read a leadership book. I don't think they ever studied leadership in school. But these were premier prime leaders because they had it inside of them. And so my question and dilemma is leadership really something that's taught, or are there just people who have the leadership gene and inspiration inside? And those are the people we've got to find.
The answer is both. There is no doubt there are some extraordinary leaders who we can point to, and you've mentioned wonderful people and throughout history there have often been people who have just emerged. When you dig into their biography, however, what you'll often find is that there have been formative influences. They may not have gone to school to learn about leadership, but they've learned about it in other ways. So if you think about the dogged persistence of an Abraham Lincoln, and you think about his personality, my guess is Lincoln was an introvert. And he spent an awful lot of time, didn't he, just cutting wood, doing repetitive activities, things that he learned to do well and repeatedly, and just to keep on until he'd done. And there must have been times before Gettysburg when he wondered whether he should keep on. Formative influences. And the thing about that is, of course, that we can create formative influences deliberately for our employees. But don't think that it's magic. It's formative influences. that shape a personality. The personality deals you the hand of cards. You learn over time to play the hand. But formative influences take us forward. The same thing could be true, incidentally, of people who make wine. I sat in Australia with the guy who was running British Airways, a guy called Rod Eddington, an Australian guy, a lovely bloke. He's not the current CEO of BA, but the one before that. And I worked very closely with him. He also ran Cathay Pacific Airways for a while. Good, close personal friend now, a guy called Rod Eddington. And he took me to a vineyard in Western Australia where a mother and daughter were the two winemakers. And the mother had had not a lesson on making wine in her life, and she was spontaneously just able to taste and create, to blend wonderful wines. And the daughter she sent to university to learn about enology. And I had the most wonderful lunch in which each was arguing that the other was the better winemaker. And it felt a bit like this conversation, in which, the mother was saying, but you're so smart, you've learned all these real clever things you can do with the wine, and the wine you create is different, it's new, it's original, and it's never poor. And she kept saying, but Mum, you've got such flair. The wine you make, okay, some years are not so good, but when they're good, they're fantastic. It's both.
For those of us who are in the business of preparing a new generation of leaders, what would you say are the kinds of experiences that we need to help them with or provide for them? What's the training piece?
I think that ideas are powerful. We need to give them models and ideas. The reason I offer the primary colours model is not because I want to go down in history of having devised it, but because I think it's easy to remember and it makes sense of the research. And if you can remember it, you can use it. So I think we do need to give people models that make sense, that they can grab, that they can pull on at any given time. But the second thing, and this is really critical for me, is we need to work on collective leadership like our lives depended on it. And that's not the same as how to work in teams. That's important too. How do we get jobs done in teams is really an important thing, but I'm not talking about that. It's how can we lead. Not how can I lead you and we get work done. That's a different task. But how can we share leadership talents? And the metaphors I think that we've got to use are more likely to come from things that are outside the workplace. So for example, I play jazz. I play in a jazz band. And I sing. And what I've had to learn to do is to get over my nerves by absolutely trusting the fact that the musicians want me to do well as well. And I can't play what they play. So I think music is a much better metaphor than anything I know of. Because if you think about it, what do we want from people? We want them to feel clear about what we're trying to achieve. So for example, if I say that we're going to play, this is my jazz band, and we're going to play Autumn Leaves, and we're going to play it in A minor, and we're going to play it to this tempo. Everybody clear? Now, once you've bought into just those three things, you've then got massive freedom to improvise. And we'll still have great music. There's just a frame around it. It is Autumn Leaves. We're not playing the 1812 Overture. It is A minor. Don't think of another key. And this is the tempo we're playing to. Just buy into those three things. Then you've got freedom. Step outside it and you've got chaos. So I think that there are developmental experiences that we can take people through which are counterintuitive, but they do make people do things like, one of the most important things that jazz musicians can do is listen to what everybody else is playing. The second thing they'll do is they'll check their ego at the door. The really great musicians won't necessarily play because they'll listen. and they'll say, it doesn't need my guitar right now, so I won't play it. So it's not about ego. So these developmental experiences are sometimes counterproductive. So I'd say, give them models that make sense. Don't teach them models that are incoherent. Many organizations, for example, have leadership models that make no sense whatsoever. They've got contradictions all over them. They've got work at different levels. They've got some attributes that they favor and some things they want people to do. The primary colors model has 7 tasks. These are things that we need to do. They're all written at the same level. So give them models that make sense. Put them into collectives so that they learn to work together. But then teach them the next higher order skill, which is how to lead the tasks together. Teach them to check their ego at the door. If necessary, bring in some musicians. Let them learn to play. And another thing I do, which I'm the chairman of British weightlifting. And in the Olympic year, that was kind of an interesting thing to do. But working with weightlifters is a real pain. Because they're individuals. They can't check their egos at the door because it's all about them. It's about, can I, on my own, lift that weight? It's much better to work with musicians who learn that you can't play a symphony on your own. So I'd just say, think broadly. That's the task. Clarity of purpose and direction. Clarity of models that we're going to use and values that we're going to use as guiding principles. Experiences that emphasize achieving things together. And by the way, look very critically at your remuneration and benefits system, which almost certainly will overemphasize individual performance.
Do we have time for one more?
This lady here. Go.
This might be a really granular question, but you talked about recruiting people or picking people for your teams that kind of fill in the gaps. So what resources do you recommend for divisions or departments or companies that are looking for a certain type of skill set? Really tactical things like books or processes or things that you can do to find that individual or evaluate those competencies or skills?
Well, let's just take half a step back from the question and then I will answer it. The first thing you need to do when you're recruiting in any position is ask, who's left? We never do that. We say, what's the task? What's the future about? We want someone to do that for us. Okay, but what team have they got to work with? What's the gap that they have left when that person's taken away? Right, so if you've got, I mean, let's just imagine that you've got a sensational top team in an organization or a divisional team, but you're going to take one person out. The question is, what completes the team? Not just in terms of background and experience. So, it's got to be a chemist. Okay, but what else do they need to be in leadership terms? So I'd offer you the primary colors model as a way of thinking about what leadership contribution is about to walk out of the door. Yeah? We need that contribution to be made up for in some way. So all I'd say to start with is look at the context in terms of the people. The second thing I'd say is look at the context in terms of the journey. Where has this team been and what are its forthcoming challenges? You need to recruit someone who understands and honors the past, who can transform the present in order to create the future. So you've got to look at the historical context. And then that gets to the specification of what you're after. How do you then find the right person? There are techniques to do so. They come under the heading usually of executive assessment. They're often run by psychologists. When I say I've looked at, I and my colleagues have assessed about 2,000 executives. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. But there are people all over the world who will offer those services, but you need to find ones that you trust. Find ones who will offer you tools that are robust, not wacky ideas. If they start talking like that fads slide on the first thing I showed you, avoid them like the plague. You want people who can say, this is what we look at, this is why, this is how, and this is what you'll get. And then finally, don't let them make the decision. they can do the analytical work that says this person's more like this, and this person's more like that, and that person's more like this. You choose.
Helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen.